You need to stop describing, like, dude, I hate the dishonest argument that I see on Twitter all the time. And I will say, this is also from well-known content creators. I'm tired of seeing this. Okay, Mythbusters. I'm actually going to delete some of these, not because they're bad, but because they're just, I want to focus on the good stuff. Can nano supports heal better? No, that's not, first off, the answer is no. And first off, I don't want to do like a car queue style Mythbusters. I want to be more like game theory, game philosophy mindset. Yeah. The tank's job is 100% to peel the enemy Doomfist's dive, especially if you're playing Winston. Do not dive, always peel. Yeah, I do see this one a lot from tanks, that it's your job to protect your team. I feel like this is definitely a tired trope, but there are plenty of people out there that need to hear it. Your job as tank is to apply pressure on the enemy team to force threats to look at you. Whether it's to kill them or not, you need to force the attention. And there are way too many tanks that go backwards to deal with the attention without creating their own pressure. The problem with that is that not very many tanks are good at dealing with pressure from the enemy team, from the enemy tank, excuse me. In other words, if Doomfist dives your backline, yeah, bubble's kind of useful, but it's better to just bubble off the backline. It's better off to bubble off the DPS because you're also a lot more lethal threat. You force more cooldowns, you do more damage, you have higher chance of baiting attention. You can't really peel enemy Doomfist dive unless you can't even access backline. A lot of tanks get this mindset wrong. Even D.Va is not that great at peeling all the time. She's not always in a good position to. She can't boost her there quickly enough. But yeah, it is not your job to dive, to peel necessarily. Your job is to apply pressure on the enemy team. Now that might be on the tank or that might be on the backline. Depends on the situation, but it's not always your job to protect your backline. It's your backline's job to protect your backline. The idea of one-tricking versus counter-picking when it comes to climbing, which is actually better, I would say both are opposite extremes. I think counter-picking, unless you're counter-picking within your hero pool, so like let's say that you have like a hero pool of like Zarya, D.Va, Winston, you can play the counter-pick game because you always have a tank that you play that might be best in the situation. I think if you play the game like that, you can climb as good as you can one-tricking, because I think one-tricking is really good too. I think the optimal way of doing things is, you know, having a small hero pool and then picking the tank that makes the most sense in the situation, whether it's the map or the enemy comp, and then sometimes forcing yourself to play in suboptimal circumstances because you will learn the limits of your character. You'll learn not just be able to play in the optimal circumstances, because you'll learn details and things that you wouldn't otherwise learn. I think people look at this as like either it's like Bloods versus Crips, but it's really not that simple, right? Some people one trick and they just turn their brain off and they never improve. Some people counter pick and they just pick characters outside of their hero pool because Sigma counters Orisa or whatever, and they just pick it and they don't know how to play and they don't climb at all. I generally am more against counter picking because of the way of how people counter pick, which is really lazily and or focusing on the enemy tank instead of the entire enemy comp or the map. So I find more people get hard stuck through counter picking than one tricking because it's hard not to one trick and improve. You can, it's not even optimal, but one tricking just almost naturally lends itself to improvement. Switch off Pharah, the double hit scan. Great one from Geomaster here. Yeah, I see this one all the time. The irony here is that old Pharah, but even more so new Pharah with how much you can reposition, Pharah does really well versus immobile characters because it becomes very easy to land your rockets and it's also very easy to abuse your mobility. Even something like a barrage. So yes, becomes hit scan is high risk, high reward. And if you have a lot of verticality, hit scan is better to play into than flankers. I would rather play Pharah into double hit scan than something like a Tracer, right? Like Tracer Echo kind of a thing, right? Are Koreans really just genetically superior Overwatch players? We've talked about this before. It's a cultural thing. You should, whenever somebody excels at anything, literally anything, individual, team, community, ethnicity, look at the culture. Look at the culture. Are there genetic aspects? Probably. Not with Koreans necessarily, but like there are probably some genetic things where they are born in the community. Because you also have to understand that when a genetic pool is formed, that entire community is going to have similarities, right? So Korean players are genetically similar to other Korean people, right? But you always look at the environment first. You look at the culture first. Now, how did the culture get formed? Well, you go way back here. Koreans have had more access to heavy esports culture for like what, 15, 20 years longer than the West, to my knowledge. I mean, I'm pretty sure, like going back to StarCraft, they've been involved in esports, like they were like 10 to 15 years ahead of time. The whole PC bang culture makes it significantly easier. This is the other thing too. A weird way of looking at it as well is how much space does the West have for sports? How much space does the East have for sports? Think about it that way. Like as simple as that. Where I live, everybody's got a freaking yard. Everybody's got a tennis court, a football field, a basketball court. Everybody. You go down your freaking cul-de-sac and you count the basketball hoops, right? Everybody has space to do sports. So when you go west, everybody freaking plays sports. Everybody. Korean from culture, I don't know as much about that, but I can look at the map and go, wow, that's a really small country with a lot of people in it, right? We don't have internet cafes here. And if you do, you have to drive there. You have to drive everywhere in America. There's so many factors you have to consider here. Heck, you have to also consider the solo-oriented mindset. Like, I don't know as much about this, but I don't know about Europeans versus Koreans, but I know Americans versus Koreans. Americans are me first. We are very independent people, very self-confident usually, and not as good when functioning with the team. And this lines up with my coaching experience as well, which means that, I don't know exactly if that trickles down to how Overwatch works, but it's certainly worth considering. Yeah, so there's a million things there. And this is the obvious answer. Epigenetics, culture, and map advantage. Yeah, exactly. I even look at something, people always ask me, like, why are Koreans better at Winston? I actually think it's probably Miro. I actually think it's Miro and Ryu Jae-hong. You guys remember Miro and Ryu Jae-hong? I think you could probably point to a large percentage of why Korean players are better at dive to a random, at the time, pro player / streamer. And you want to know why Western players are better at Rhine? Because there was a lot of really popular Western, like, remember, Clone Man? They're just Rhine players. You know what I'm saying? So randomly some Korean streamer decides that he really likes Winston, and now everybody grows up watching Miro Winston and wants to play Winston, and obviously Ryu Jae-hong Ana, same kind of thing. And then now the entire culture of their macro and meta revolves around the Miro and Winston, and it snowballs. What happens if Miro became a popular streamer and decided that he wanted to play Roadhog? Like, we might have an entirely different, now probably wouldn't have been Roadhog because of the scalability of that skill, but you get what I'm saying? Like, a lot of that kind of stuff. That's why we talk about, like, the East Coast special in the US, because there are a lot of well-known players in the West that just one-trick goofy characters, So it's interesting. Does everyone actually need to stay in objective to capture faster? No, very rarely. Very rarely. I see more fights tossed by people stacking 3 on point and not taking space, even in high ranks, than I do with, we could have capped if we'd had 3 on point. As Brigitte, you need to be on your second support all the time, and the fact that people don't know what to do when you aren't guarding your other support. Yeah, so the thing with Brigitte is she's a really good bodyguard, but she doesn't have to be on top of somebody to bodyguard. And the problem is that if you bodyguard when they're not threatened, then you end up not providing as much value as other support. So if you sit in the backline when your backline isn't being threatened, then your front line loses. So not that you're playing directly on your tank, but you could kind of, like, when your squishy is threatened, play with them, but otherwise try to get your selfish value with proccing, inspire, controlling space, packing, and so on. The myth that picking certain characters can make a game impossible to win. That's obviously true. I feel like there's some of these myths that are like, if you think this, I don't think I can get through to you. I think your brain has rotted so far away that if we pick Symmetra here, we're going to insta lose. There's just no point talking to you, so I agree that that's definitely a myth I see a lot, but there's no point addressing it, because if you're stupid enough to think that, then I'm not going to be able to change your mind. I don't know if somebody already said this, but Reaper meleeing to animation cancel shotguns reload is a classic Overwatch myth. I still do it every time I knowing it doesn't help. Just read about. Yeah. I mean, I think this one kind of fits a little bit. I think, it's a good point. It's a unique point. Yeah. I think a lot of the animation cancels in general are just not all that useful. Scoreboard doesn't ever matter when in reality it can be used to make conclusion summons. For example, if everyone's -1 player's a normal KD, it probably isn't that player's fault. Yeah, I appreciate you playing devil's advocate here. I really do. I think that's true. I think there are, it's the same thing. Like, counter swapping doesn't exist. Scoreboard literally never matters. Context. I think the thing with scoreboard matters more for certain heroes. Like, Moira Diva just doesn't matter. Like, you can farm so many damage, die so few times, farm so many eliminations, and just not really do anything of value. Doomfist's right. Like, you might get traded a lot, but having a high deaths as Doomfist isn't necessarily bad. It just depends. As always. Aim is the biggest source of skill ceiling. I think mechanics are both overrated and underrated. It just depends on the community that you're in. They're underrated by the educational community. They're overrated by the non-educational community. It's just depends where you're going. They're both overrated and underrated. Depends on the community. Interesting discussion could be the sentiment that DPS is the worst, least impactful role, and that support and tank are just better DPS. Addressing why this has become a sentiment and the validity. The reason why that's become a sentiment is because tank is a better DPS. You have more responsibility, but you are better at DPS. You have more HP health. You have more utility. You generally just do more. Like, it's just how it is. Now, it's apples to oranges for sure, but you do have more in your kit and more than DPS. You have more responsibility, which is fine. Now, at the higher levels, I think the things that make DPS unique in terms of the mobility and so on is generally a superior thing. We heard from Gavin Winter that DPS has basically the same amount of impact as a tank at higher levels, but in lower levels, I can understand that being the case. But actually, I'm not even sure. I wonder if in lower ranks. Anyway, regardless. The reason this is the sentiment is that in Overwatch 2, a lot of support heroes have kits that allow them to support their team or to support themselves. Because they have the responsibility of both damage and healing, you look at a Baptiste with Lamp and Regenerative Burst, that's a really powerful dueling cooldown, but it's oftentimes not going to be used to duel. And so the impression, the thing that DPS players benefit from, and nobody talks about this, is lack of responsibility. Not that there's no responsibility, it's simple responsibility though. You don't have to worry about whether wasting a Regenerative Burst on yourself if I could have missed position. You don't have to worry about your tank supporting anybody else or healing anybody else. You just have to worry about your damage, and that's it. That's it. So if you look at Baptiste versus, Genji in a mirror, in a vacuum, Baptiste should win that, right? Like, he just has too many cooldowns. But the problem is that if Bap uses his cooldowns versus a Genji, then he no longer has anything to support his team. And it's also very possible and even normal for Genji to be able to force the cooldowns from Bap without dying. Right? So like BAP has Regenerative Burst and Lamp for that engagement, but something that DPS players also generally have that aren't Kiriko, or competing with Kiriko, is the ability to say, you know what, I'm done. I'll see you later when you don't have your cooldowns, right? Often supports are a lot more tempo oriented, right? You have characters like Cassidy and Genji, Tracer, that either don't have as many meaningful cooldowns or are able to get those cooldowns a lot faster than, say, an Anti-Nade, Sleep Dart, Lamp, Suzu. We're talking about longer cooldowns here. So if you put it in a vacuum, support characters are pretty good at duels, yes. But supports also have more responsibility, which means that they're not always able to fully focus on the duel at all times, which puts them at a disadvantage in the duel. In addition to that, many DPS characters have more ways than support players of forcing cooldowns with their primary fire, if that makes sense. Doesn't more responsibility mean more impact? No, when I say more responsibility, I mean more diverse responsibility. You're correct that more responsibility means more impact, correct, yes. But I don't mean more responsibility total. You're right, I needed to rephrase that. It's more diverse responsibility. So there's less responsibility to pressure output and more responsibility to pressure relieve. And they need to be able to put thoughts on both. A support player that only DPSs and only DPSs is not putting out as much pressure as a damage dealer most of the time. A DPS. There's just more things that you have to do, but the total impact is about the same. And we know this goes back to the statistics as well. Like, we know that there isn't a crazy disproportionate amount of impact from role at any rank, right? Even if, like, let's say you have one diamond player in your lobby and their diamond player is a tank and our diamond player is a support, or their diamond player is a DPS and our diamond player is a support, it doesn't really matter that much. It's funny that people talk about how overtuned supports are, but if you ask the average player, where would you rather your diamond player be? On tank, DPS, or support? What percentage of players would say support? Seriously, think about it. What percentage of players would say support? Ignoring the whether it's actually more impactful or not. Like 20%? Like, I feel like it'd be like 20%. Like, not zero, but like 20%. Everybody's like, tank diff, right? Or no, I'd rather on the DPS character. That's just conjecture. Obviously, there's but that definitely lines up with my experience, which is, funny. Everyone talks about support being overtuned, but then you're like, all right, you want the diamond player? What, or the GM player? Do you want him on support, or do you want him on DPS? Or do you want him on tank? And it's like, nobody's going to say support. Just put him on Moira Mercy and let him go Ryan or Roadhog, So it's just people crying. Support players cry, tank players cry, DPS players cry about every other role. It's just an endless loop. Everyone's the victim. Couldn't it be if the support is overtuned, they don't think the support player needs to be higher elo to perform? But see, that's the thing. Overtuned doesn't mean higher elo to perform. You just described skill floor. You could say that support is overtuned because skill floor, but not skill ceiling. You understand? It's a totally different concept. If you think that you don't need to put a high level player in support because it's easier to get to the skill floor, sure, but that's not where we're arguing here. You understand what I'm saying? That's a great question though. I know you're playing devil's advocate and I'm playing devil's advocate to you. I'm beating you up as if you're the random player. Because you would say it's the same reason why they want him on Moira Mercy. It's easy to just dribble your keyboard and stay alive. Now that's not necessarily true at all, but that's the impression. But even then, if you have more utility as a support player, in theory, a really good player should squeeze so much out of it, right? Would that mean DPS benefit from longer fights? No. DPS benefit more from clear cycles of pressure. First pressure, second cycle of pressure, DPS have the advantage. Longer sustained fights, supports have the advantage because heal passive, support passive. But if you go in, you go out, and then you go in again, you're both full HP, full cooldowns again, then DPS has the advantage because generally the support won't have that cooldown again by the second time around. Could we say that support's value floor is overtuned? Yeah, you could. I don't know if that's necessarily clear in a vacuum. So some support heroes value floor is overtuned. Sure. I think there are some support heroes that are too easy to get value out of, but I think there's actually just as many DPS characters that to an extent can fall into that category. Next one. Are noob heroes necessary? Now, you guys might remember this. Do you guys remember the most hated hero? So like all the most, you guys might need to pull this up again, but like all the most hated heroes and all this kind of stuff. But we actually learned that in many ways, there is a tendency for lower rank characters to dislike noob heroes more than higher rank players. So you look at like a higher rank player, you know, those heroes don't scale as well at the higher ranks, characters like Moira and so on, but they're abused a lot in the lower ranks, and that leads to lower rank people hating them more. So in actuality, in my experience, most lower rank characters want to play Genji. They want to play Cassidy, or they want to play Ryan, or they want to play Winston, or they want to play Ana, and so on. And with a few exceptions, of course, most lower rank characters, heroes, myself included, are very popular because people want to play higher skill characters, right? They want to because they're cool, they're fun. People aren't attracted because the character is easy, it's because it's fun. They only play the other character out of a feel of necessity. Now, I understand that there's a bit of a selection bias here where the visibility of lower noob heroes like Bastion and Moira means that people hate them more. People will always hate a character that they see more of. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's more. But I would still argue that regardless of that, noob heroes generally hurt noob players the most because the ease of getting value out of Bastion versus the ease of getting value out of Genji can be very discouraging for new players to try and pick up a character like Genji because they can't get value out of him at all. And so they end up going, well, I can either play Bastion, Moira, Orisa, or nothing. And so I don't want to play this game if I have to play those characters. These characters have simpler gameplay loops, but they're also in many ways not as fun to play. Bastion and Moira are always picked as problem solvers, when in reality they aren't exactly problem solvers, and that's what makes them frustrating. Like, unbelievable. I would love some statistics from Blizzard out there if there's anyone who ever sees this video. I would love to see the percentage of people that roll out on Noob Stomper characters versus swap to Noob Stomper characters in lower ranks. Love to see the stats on that. I think it'd be very telling. But yeah, the TLDR is that without statistical 100% confirmation, in my experience, new players hurt noob heroes. Noob heroes hurt noob players the most. Okay, we'll keep going here. Power creep is subjective. Now, this one's going to be spicy. I'm not disagreeing with the concept of power creep necessarily, all right? I don't disagree with the concept of power creep. In other words, that it doesn't happen. Whenever you ask people for power creep examples, usually you get people kind of fumbling for oxygen. There are some exceptions. I think like Roadhog is a great example where his rework removed, I actually made him worse in some ways, but it definitely was a power creep for that character. I think there's been some examples of tank power creep as well, for sure, with the passives. What I'm saying is that when you talk about power creep, you need to be very careful that you're clarifying the difference between kit bloat and power. Kit bloat and power. Let me give you guys an example. Who's stronger, Malga or Reinhardt? Watch this. Malga can shoot with 2 guns and sustain himself. Reinhardt cannot. Malga has defensive cooldown that not only gives him damage reduction, but allows him to heal himself for more. Malga also can generate overhealth off of that. Malga has Reinhardt pin, but better, because yes, he can't shield while he's doing it, but neither can, well, Reinhardt can't either, never mind for that matter. But he takes damage reduction that Reinhardt doesn't have. And he also has slam that's more consistent in AoE that Reinhardt doesn't have. And he's also immune to CC, which Reinhardt doesn't have. His ultimate is also significantly more consistent and traps people for a long period of time and is not near as easy to counter whatsoever. The problem with kit bloat is people extrapolate it as to being actual kit efficiency. Let's actually go back to Kiriko for just a brief moment. How many of you guys have heard about how teleport is the most powerful cooldown in the game? It's an ultimate. How many of you guys have heard that Suzu is an ultimate because it does 4 or 5 different things and therefore it makes Kiriko OP? How many of you guys have heard about how easy it is to play a Kiriko mechanically because of how spammy her damage is? How many times have you guys heard it is easy to sit in the backline and heal bot and just build ultimate? How many times have you guys heard that the hitbox of Kiriko is broken? Heck, how many of you guys have heard that Baptiste has an ultimate on a cooldown, right? The problem with these arguments is not that the criticism of those cooldowns or those hero designs are false. You notice that we brought up Lamp, Kiriko, and Malga, definitely all characters that I think have problematic designs, but the difference is it's kit bloat. There's too many things going on without enough concentrated vision, which makes not only playing the character complicated, right? But it also makes it annoying to play versus. The problem with that is you dilute the quality of your argument if you say power creep. If you say the word power creep, you expose yourself to the easy counterpoint of, it's not power creep, this guy sucks. Malga's super weak right now. Kiriko's win rate's 49%, bro. It's like the second lowest of all the support. I'm making that up, but generally, right? You have a million different things going on, but you can't do anything with them, right? And it's a fair point. So when you critique hero designs, you need to critique the hero. Anything's fair game, right? But when you critique how powerful a character is, you need to stop describing, like, dude, I hate the dishonest argument that I see see on Twitter all the time. And I will say, this is also from well-known content creators. I'm tired of seeing this, where they just list off the character's abilities. Let me try this. Ready? What's the most underpowered character in Overwatch? What do you think is the most... Oh, you know what? Let's do Genji. Let's just do Genji. All right, you're telling me the character with not one passive, not two passives, but 3 passives is crying that they're underpowered. You have enhanced movement speed to get in, get out, set up. You have freaking wall climb, which can get you to any verticality literally off of cooldown. And then you have double jump, which by the way, is not just good for repositioning yourself, but also good for dueling anybody up close, makes it literally impossible to aim. And they were like, that's not good enough. Let's keep adding more bloat to the kit. Let's give him 2 forms of primary fire, which is, oh yeah, you think Genji's damage is bad? Check this out. Hello? 200 HP target or not? Look at this. 3 shots from any range, 0 fall off. Oh, I'm up close. You know what? Let's alt fire, instant kill. Instant kill. Oh, and by the way, let's just make the fire rate faster with alternate fire, because that's not good enough. That's not good enough. And we haven't even started talking about the rest of his abilities. The dash, which not only allows you to reposition literally instantly, not only does it do damage, but it also resets anytime that you get an elimination. Oh wait, did I say elimination? Remember, not final kill. Not kill blow, but elimination. You can tickle somebody and get a dash reset, okay? So you have 1 get out of jail free card with your movement speed. You have 2 get out of jail free cards with your double jump. You have 3 get out of jail free cards with your wall climb. You have 4 get out of jail free cards with your dash. And then you know what? Let's make it 5, because deflect not only is really good at reflecting damage back at the target, and you can cancel it any time, by the way. Remember when you actually had a wall climb to cancel deflect? Don't need to do that anymore. Cancel it whenever you want. Impossibly massive advantage in a duel. But yeah, deflect buys yet even more time and allows you and your enhanced movement speed to get to cover. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 disengage or engage tools. You have 5 defensive cooldowns. 5 defensive cooldowns. Oh, don't get me started about Blade. Everyone cries about how Blade does 0 damage. I'm sorry, but 110 damage with the range of like a pool noodle with extensions. Look at the range of this. Watch this. This is melee, right? Look at that. Look at that. That is, what is that, 5 meters, 6 meters on a melee? It almost doubles your melee range, resets your dash, and the whole point, the reason why Genji mains cry about how bad this ultimate was, is because they think they're the main character. They think that I press Q, I should be able to kill 4 people. Nobody asks them, hey, maybe the ultimate doesn't even need to kill people. It does enough damage to force cooldowns. It does enough damage to kill anything that doesn't have an ultimate. Don't say, oh, well, they just press an ability that cancels the ultimate. You have, what, 7 slashes? 6, 8? I think they buffed it, didn't they? It used to be 6 and now it's 7, now it's 8. They've power crept this as well. Everyone cries about Genji's damage getting nerfed. Dude, you chop faster and you get more chops, you jackass. The total damage output is higher than it used to be. And these guys are crying about it. Crying about it. Main character syndrome right here. 5 defensive cooldowns and offensive cooldowns. An ultimate that is only people cry about because it doesn't kill 6 every time, just some of the time. And don't even get me started on Nanoblade. Don't even get me started on Nanoblade. Literally at the level to where even professional players can't counter it. 2 forms of damage with a shotgun damage that Reaper wishes he had, and long range damage that any projectile character that isn't named Mei wishes they had. And then you have the hitbox that is not only incredibly hard to strafe by itself, but then you combo it with every single... Okay, you guys see what I'm saying? You guys see what I'm saying? Is anything that I said wrong there? No, it's not. Yeah, I might actually want to play. I might actually want to play, honestly. I think we've done enough myths for now.